I would like to talk to you about location because I think a lot of us are getting more and more into location, and location runs the risk, much like gamification, of just being a surface layer that we apply, especially now that iOS 7 is coming out and they're like maps, right? So I'm hoping to introduce the richness behind things like check-ins, because they can actually be very magical. So to introduce this idea, I would like to start with something that I think we're all familiar with, and that is portability, right? In the tech world, we're often told that our jobs are portable, so this is me. This is literally me, but this is also me in the metaphor, because this paper bag is my job, right? And portability isn't something that is new or necessarily specific to the tech world. Historically, it's also been applied to careers like nursing or teaching or administrative work, basically anything that you can dedicate your life to and have a high probability of moving and continuing to do elsewhere. So elsewhere meaning usually the United States. And I have actually taken advantage of this. I have worked from lots of different places in the country successfully, remotely, mostly temporarily. But if there was one place that I could work from by choice for at least part of the year, it would be here. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's in the bottom right. It's Guam. I'm from Guam. My family is still there, so that would be my place of choice. And I actually have worked there. It's difficult because contrary to what this map would have you believe, Guam is not actually off the coast of southern Florida. You'd be surprised. No one would be surprised to not know where Guam is, right? It is actually north of Australia, south of Japan, and just to the right of the Philippines. So right there. And if I really wanted to push the idea of portability, this is where I could do it feasibly. And that brings me to my first point, which is that places change you. If I did try to work from Guam, could I be the same person that I am here in San Francisco? This is where I live. And I am about to argue that no, you can't. But in order to dissect this idea, I think we should establish the you that is being changed, which in this example is me. So how do I identify? I identify as female. I also identify as Asian Pacific Islander. I don't know if it's Asian Pacific Islander American. I don't know if we double hyphenate these things. Somebody please come and tell me later. I also identify as gay. And user interface and user experience design is what I do. And I'm an active-ish person. I like to walk. Walking is my preferred mode of transportation and exercise. Like I'll hike with you if the hike is for scenery, not to like meet some personal best incline. I don't know, like do you like speed hike? I don't know what people do for hikes. But so if I move to Guam, how much of that would stay intact? I'm about as comfortable being a woman on Guam as I am anywhere else. There are women in positions of power there, both in the private and public sector, so that's cool. But there's still a prevalence of sexual violence that is similar to what you would find in major cities, so give or take, that would remain the same. Asian Pacific Islander. Guam is an island in the Pacific, and it's full of Asians, so this largely remains intact as part of my identity. Gay is where it starts to sort of go downhill, because the island is mostly Catholic, so there's a lot of tension still around this issue. So this is, like for example, I wouldn't be able to hold my partner's hand in public without getting some like comments. But this is an aspect of my identity that I would have to stifle. Moving along, this is what I do for a living. This is the type of design that I love to do. Let me revert back to this map. This is where Guam is. So it's difficult to work remotely from here because it tends to mean that my client calls will happen at 2 or 3 in the morning. If I do a design review, then that feedback comes in the middle of the night, and I get really antsy to get this review, this feedback, so I don't sleep very well. And if I'm not sleeping, I might as well work at 4 or 5 in the morning. This is an unsustainable way for me to do what I do. So I would probably have to switch gears and do more of the type of design that supports the industries there, mainly tourism. So it would be merchandise design, maybe print design, and some brochureware sites. So the trade-off for me to move home again would be that my career fulfillment wouldn't quite be there. Active-ish. Guam is not really built for walking. Even if it had sidewalks everywhere, the temperatures are about 80 to 90 degrees on average, and then you also have like blankets of humidity on top of that. So I would just sort of cross us off the list. But if you are a highly active person, Guam is perfect because you can row, you can scuba dive, you can snorkel, you can hike. Right? But I would get to see my family more often. And I'd miss out on events like this a lot less. So family actually gets added to that list. One of the ways that this is my favorite definition of identity. Identity is how we make sense of ourselves. So if we take this definition and we apply it to place, then place identity is where we make sense of ourselves. So to round off this example, where should a gay user interface and experience designer who likes to walk everywhere be? And here I am. Another way to think of this is that there's some events, both on a small and a large scale, that make us say things like this could only happen here. For example, the Mermaid Parade in Coney Island could only happen where it does. Larger cultural events like Carnival in Venice versus Carnival in Brazil. Same religious roots, same religious affiliations, big celebration right before Lent. But because the places are totally different, their approach to this event is totally different. They can only happen that way. But even smaller events. This photo is currently being touted as the most San Francisco photo. I'm sure a lot of us have seen it. There's a young woman of color sitting next to a young man wearing Google Glass in front of a commuter bicycle that is next to a cup of Blue Bottle coffee, in front of two unicorns wearing rainbow metallic spandex, and they're holding hands and they're walking through Dolores Park. All right. So we say things like, this could only happen here, but why not? She could only happen here. Or he could only happen where he is. And so what I'm hoping for all of us is that we live in places, or at least frequently visit places, where we get to say this about ourselves. This is the perfect place for me. This is exactly where I should be. I shouldn't be anywhere else. But that doesn't mean that I should never go home. That means that I shouldn't go home when I'm focusing on my career, and that means that I should go straight home when I'm focusing on family. So depending on the different aspects of your identity that you want to encourage, you should seek out the places that encourage those facets. And that's actually what I get when I look at a map of the places that I've been. For example, I went to the Philippines when I was very, very young. And seeing that I've been there reminds me of the person that I was when I was like 10. And the person that I was when I was 10 was so overwhelmed with culture shock, because when you're in these types of places, everything is different. Like the way that people drive, the lines in the roads are just like suggestions. You don't really have to stay on either side. You can even go the other way. It's all fine. I didn't speak the language. All the food was different. So I had to walk around holding a quarter, a United States quarter, and like rubbing it in my fingers occasionally and staring at it to make sure that I remembered that the United States actually existed still, and that I didn't dream it, and that I would be returning soon. So that's, these are the things that I remember when I look at a map of myself. This map is also a way for me to figure out how many hearts I can fit into a single professional presentation. So far you've seen maybe 18. But the way that place identity works, it's not just one way. Place affects you, and you also affect the places that you claim. And to demonstrate this, here is a clip from Parks and Recreation.
You're not from here, right?
No, I'm from South Carolina.
But you moved to South Carolina from where?
My mother's uterus.
But you were conceived in Libya, right?
Wow, no. I was conceived in America. My parents are Indian.
Where does the name Haverford come from?
My birth name is Darwish Zabir Ishmael Ghani. Then I changed it to Tom Haverford because, you know, brown guys with funny sounding Muslim names don't make it really far in politics.
What about Barack Obama?
Okay, yeah, fine, Barack Obama. If I knew a dude named Barack Obama was going to be elected president, yeah, maybe I would have changed it.
Oh, did you hear that noise?
And you should find out what that noise was, because the show is amazing. So what is that? That is a case of mistaken place identity. But more specifically, it's a case of mistaken national identity, right? Leslie Knope did not find Tom Haverford to fit in her idea of what a native-born American should look like. And this is unfortunate, because we are a country of immigrants, so this should happen less and less, but it doesn't. And I have to admit that I take advantage of this sometimes because it's dealt to me, so what else am I going to do, right? So for example, if I see someone in a bar that I don't want to talk to, I will look them in the eye and I will say, "I'm sorry, I don't speak English." Exactly like that. And then they sort of get, they get this look on their faces like, what? You know, and they keep talking, but then they talk a lot slower. And then I say, no, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't understand you because I don't speak English. And then you can see it start to process, right? They're like, well, she is brown, so maybe, you know. And I actually had one guy tell me, you know what, though, you said that really well. And I was like, oh, man, that's terrible. But this actually starts to touch on what I refer to as Zoom levels of identity, right? So the idea here is that who you are in this building, like right here, right now, or even at your office or in your home, is actually different from the way that you perceive yourself outside of that building. So maybe in your neighborhood or in your city or your country or even your hemisphere, like Eastern versus Western. And it's weird because what could we possibly know from, you know, about anybody for sure, based on their national identity? Maybe another way to think about this is like, what could you possibly know for sure about anybody based on the landmass that received them when they came out of somebody's uterus? There is nothing that you could know for sure based on, you know, where they first touched ground, basically. But we assume so many things. And so what I'm hoping is that we all realize this, that identity is shaped by the people who claim it. So I tell you that I am from Guam, and that should sort of expand your idea of what Guam means to include the fact that people from Guam speak English, and you know, some of us do it really well. And then hopefully you can take that outward and you know that people from not America maybe also speak English pretty well. So basically, we teach each other about our places, and we should, because that means that we're evolving our ideas of cultural identity. And this, hopefully, these smaller epiphanies can be the wedge into larger conversations, because we have so many battles based on whose sense of place is more powerful than whose. Like the smaller versions of this battle are like neighborhood gentrification, but it goes all the way up to years-long wars about land rights. And this is essentially what they boil down to. However, if we can expand our idea of what us means, like it's in this country, so what does American mean, then it starts becoming less of an other. It starts becoming less us versus them and more just all of us together, right? And so this brings me to my last point. What is the big deal about place? Why does it mean so much to people? Why do we even check in? You know, what does that tell anybody? Place is powerful, and I think that it's powerful because it is, at the core of it is this thing, location. Location is an anchor. When I talk about place, and I think a lot of us make this distinction, place is more like that intangible essence of being somewhere, whereas location is just coordinates. It is a pin on a map. It is set. And in order to talk about this, I would like to introduce you to my Lola. This is my grandma. When my grandma was growing up in the Philippines, shortly after World War II, she received her nursing degree. And then she met my grandpa, and they moved to Guam. And then early in her nursing career, they asked her to do a training in Colorado. It was a 2-week training. There were a bunch of other nurses, and she had a dorm that had more amenities than the other nurses, and so they would all sort of like socialize in her room. And she said it was a lot of fun, actually. But 2 incidents happened. One is that she told me that she was the only nurse with black hair. And that leads me to believe that she was also the only non-white nurse. And one of the things that they did was they would take snow and try to put it in her hair to make it less black. You know, like, ha, 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 that's super funny. It's not funny. And then they would also, the other thing that they did was they would make fun of her accent. And this is the accent of her second language, you know. So she was really disheartened. I don't think she realized how disheartened at the time, but she was. And this is where she made the decision to not teach her children Visayan. It's a Filipino dialect. And so her children didn't teach their children, and now I don't know Filipino. So essentially, I lost the ability to speak my language here. And it's weird looking at this on a map because it tells you a couple of different things. The first thing that it did to me was that it made this event that much more real. Because even though my Lola has aged, she's still alive. So don't like, oh, she's not here anymore. No, she's still with us. Even though she's aged, and even though that clinic has transformed into a larger hospital, that location is still there. Location is tangible history. When I talk about an event, I tend to break it up into 3 parts. The first are the actors of the event. The second is there's a period of time in which the event takes place. And the last is location. And of the 3 of those things, location is the only one that persists, actually. Here's another version of this map, right? So there's where it happened to her, and here's where we are right now. And this actually changes the story a little bit, because now it becomes a story about a woman who traveled 8,000 miles to do training in a country that she was trying to be a part of. And she was insulted here. But 70 years later, her granddaughter is on a stage at a conference speaking English, right? 3 states away. So location connects us. It literally connects us. And now you are all part of the story because of this connection. But if we zoom in, it becomes even more interesting, because a few years after my Lola left that hospital, this woman, Dr. Justina Ford, she is actually Denver's first female doctor and their first African-American doctor, much less their first African-American female doctor. So she's an amazing woman. A few years after my Lola left, she was finally admitted into both the state and national medical associations after decades of having tried to get acceptance so that she could practice properly in a hospital. Up until that point, she had actually practiced out of her home. She delivered about 7,000 babies in her life. She served underserved communities in that area, so Native Americans, poor whites, other black people. And so in that same space where my Lola decided not to teach my language, she finally came into her own. So I think that's an interesting connection. And that's the other thing that location does, is that it connects histories. And the more powerful way to think about that is that it connects our histories. So what I would like to leave you with is the hope that we all engage with our places a little bit more. Be in places that are good for you, because these are the places that are going to nourish you. Literally, even, there are places with better food than other places. But also mentally, it can help your career. It can help strengthen your actual relationships. Keep evolving your ideas of who belongs where. And lastly, just be where you are. Be present. And the thing that I want you to take away from this, if nothing else, is that we experience these moments that are sometimes so fragile, and you're not sure how long that moment is going to last, and then you think, oh man, maybe I should get my phone out and take a picture, or like try to get this on video, and you're already kind of like pulling yourself out of the moment when you start to think that way. So maybe if we are comfortable enough with just knowing where something happened, we can hold on to that place, and maybe that will be enough. Thank you.